What if everything we believe about the strength of the US dollar is on borrowed time? For decades, the dollar has reigned as the world's undisputed financial king, powering global trade, influencing geopolitical decisions, and shaping the very architecture of international finance. But behind the curtain of this monetary empire, a quiet storm has been gathering. China, wielding its own currency, the Yuan, has been crafting a strategy to unseat the dollar. What if Beijing's plan isn't just working, but already reshaping the world in ways we've failed to notice? This is the story of how money became power, how that power is now being challenged, and whether America's financial dominance is about to face its most serious threat yet. Let's start at the beginning. In the aftermath of World War II, the world needed rebuilding, and it needed stability. At Bretton Woods in 1944, 44 Allied nations met to forge a new financial order. The US, untouched by war and flush with gold, emerged as the central pillar. The dollar was pegged to gold. Every other currency was pegged to the dollar. America had effectively monetized trust. This system made the dollar the anchor of global trade. Even after President Nixon broke the gold link in 1971, the dollar remained dominant, thanks to a stroke of geopolitical genius, the petrodollar system. Through deals with Saudi Arabia and other oil producers, the US ensured oil would be sold only in dollars. That meant every nation needed dollars. Every nation had to play by America's monetary rules. With that came enormous power. The US could borrow cheaply, sanction rivals, and export inflation or deflation at will. The dollar became more than currency. It became leverage. But leverage, when overused, invites resistance. Enter China. As its economic engine roared to life in the late 20th century, China found itself growing within a dollar-dominated system that left it vulnerable. Every international transaction meant exposure to US policies. Every investment had to thread the needle of American interests. And every time Washington sanctioned someone, Beijing saw a warning. By the early 2000s, China began quietly laying the groundwork to challenge this system. Step by step, Yuan internationalization became a national project. It started subtly, with bilateral trade agreements denominated in yuan. Then came yuan swap lines with key trading partners. Then the launch of the cross-border interbank payment system, ECEPS, an alternative to the US-controlled SWIFT network. Each move was technical, understated, but cumulative. In 2016, a milestone, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, added the yuan to its basket of reserve currencies, alongside the dollar, euro, pound, and yen. It was symbolic, yes, but also structural. China was signaling its intention to be more than a factory of the world. It wanted financial sovereignty. It wanted leverage. Then came the breaking point. In 2022, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the US and its allies froze over $300 billion in Russian central bank assets. This was unprecedented. For China, it was a warning shot across the bow. Dollar reserves are not untouchable. They are political. The global response was muted, but the private calculations were not. Suddenly, nations like China, India, Iran, Brazil, and even US allies began asking hard questions. What happens if we fall out with Washington? What happens if our assets are frozen? What happens if our trade is sanctioned? These weren't hypotheticals anymore. They were policy scenarios. In 2023, China and Brazil agreed to settle trade in their own currencies. Saudi Arabia announced it was open to selling oil in yuan. Even France bought LNG from China in yuan. These moves were not seismic individually, but together they signaled a shift. A world of parallel systems was emerging. But the story doesn't end with Beijing's rise. It hits turbulence in the fallout. The yuan is not the dollar. It's tightly controlled. Capital controls remain strict. Transparency is murky. Foreign investors are cautious. And critically, trust, built through decades of stable institutions and open markets, is not easily replicated. When countries use the dollar, they're not just choosing a currency. They're choosing a system backed by US rule of law, deep capital markets, and predictable governance. The yuan, by contrast, is tethered to the political will of the Chinese Communist Party. This has led to a strange paradox. Even as China's trade footprint expands, and even as more deals are denominated in yuan, global reserves held in yuan remain under 3%. The dollar, by contrast, still makes up nearly 60% of global reserves. So Beijing's campaign has seen partial success, but not supremacy. Still, the cracks are visible. The dollar's dominance is not collapsing, but eroding, slowly, systemically. Let's look at some data. In 2001, the dollar was used in over 80% of global foreign exchange reserves. Today, that's closer to 58%. Meanwhile, global gold reserves are rising. Central banks are quietly diversifying. Between 2022 and 2024, central banks bought gold at the fastest pace since records began. This is not just about currency, it's about trust. A growing number of countries no longer want to rely solely on the US financial system. Patterns repeat. In the early 20th century, the British pound held the same position the dollar does today. Global trade ran on sterling, but two world wars, rising US power, and shifting economic fundamentals saw the pound dethroned in favor of the dollar. Today, the US faces rising debt, political dysfunction, and monetary inflation. It still holds enormous advantages, but the trajectory feels familiar. Power, history tells us, is never permanent. It is conditional. Let's distill this into three key takeaways. First, currency dominance is not just economic. It's geopolitical. The dollar's strength comes not just from US GDP, but from military alliances, legal institutions, and global narratives of trust. Challenging that system requires more than trade. It requires a rethinking of global power. Second, China's rise is strategic, not spontaneous. From CIPS to central bank digital currencies, every move Beijing makes is part of a broader plan to de-dollarize key segments of its economy, and ultimately the world's. Third, the erosion of dollar dominance is slow, not sudden. There will likely be no single yuan moment. Instead, expect a fragmentation, different blocks, different systems, multiple reserve currencies, and a world where financial power is no longer monopolized, but negotiated. But here's the warning. A fragmented monetary world may be more democratic, but it is also more unstable. Competing systems, fractured trust, and reduced coordination raise the risks of financial crises. In such a world, sanctions lose bite, cooperation fades, and economic warfare becomes more likely. The dollar versus the yuan is not just a financial rivalry. It's a question of what kind of world we're moving toward. One centered on a single anchor, or one adrift in competing tides. So what does this mean for you? If you're a policymaker, an investor, or even just a global citizen, understand the monetary landscape is changing. Slowly, quietly, but with profound consequences. Will Beijing break America's money power? Not today. Maybe not even this decade. But it's not the end of the story. The real shift may come not when the dollar collapses, but when enough countries quietly stop believing in its permanence. If you found this story thought-provoking, don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden forces shaping our world. Share this video if you think others need to see what's happening beneath the surface. And tell us in the comments, do you think the dollar's days are numbered? Days? Because the next global power struggle may not be fought with tanks or treaties, but with ledgers and code, and it's already begun.